Mikhail Gorbachev was born in 1931 in the Stavropol region, a largely agrarian area deeply shaped by the upheavals of early Soviet rule. His formative years unfolded during the height of Joseph Stalin's regime, a period defined by forced collectivization, political purges, and intense ideological conformity. These experiences left an enduring imprint. Gorbachev witnessed both the promise and the brutality of Soviet socialism at a grassroots level. Unlike many later reformers who emerged from dissident or intellectual circles, Gorbachev was a true insider. His early success, earning the Order of the Red Banner of Labor for agricultural work, propelled him into higher education at Moscow State University, one of the Soviet Union's most prestigious institutions. There he studied law and joined the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, embedding himself firmly within the system he would later attempt to transform. This period was crucial. It combined ideological loyalty with exposure to broader intellectual currents. Gorbachev did not initially seek to dismantle Soviet socialism. Rather, he believed in its potential, if it could be reformed. Following graduation, Gorbachev returned to Stavropol, where he built his political career through regional party structures. His ascent was methodical rather than dramatic. He developed a reputation for administrative competence, pragmatic thinking, and relative openness compared to the rigid orthodoxy of the time. During the long tenure of Leonid Brezhnev, 1964 to 1982, the Soviet system entered what historians often call the era of stagnation. Economic growth slowed, corruption increased, and political life became increasingly ossified. Yet it was during this period that Gorbachev advanced steadily, eventually gaining entry into the Politburo, the highest decision-making body in the Soviet Union. A key turning point came through his exposure to Western Europe during official visits. Unlike many Soviet leaders, Gorbachev saw firsthand the technological dynamism and consumer prosperity of capitalist societies. These experiences reinforced his growing belief that the Soviet system was falling dangerously behind. By the early 1980s, following the brief and ineffective leaderships of Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko, the Soviet Union faced a leadership crisis. In 1985, at just 54 years old, Gorbachev was selected as General Secretary, the youngest leader in decades and one who symbolized generational change. When Gorbachev assumed power, the Soviet Union was in deep systemic trouble. The centrally planned economy was failing to deliver growth or innovation. Industrial productivity lagged, agriculture was inefficient, and technological advancement was slow compared to the West. At the same time, the Soviet Union remained locked in the Cold War with the United States, maintaining enormous military expenditures that strained the economy. The ongoing war in Afghanistan had become a costly and demoralizing conflict, often compared to America's experience in Vietnam. Gorbachev quickly concluded that incremental reform would not suffice. The system required fundamental restructuring, economically, politically, and socially. Central to Gorbachev's agenda was perestroika, or restructuring. This policy aimed to revitalize the Soviet economy by introducing elements of decentralization and limited market mechanisms. State enterprises were granted greater autonomy, cooperatives were legalized, and attempts were made to reduce the inefficiencies of central planning. In theory, perestroika sought to create a socialist market economy, a hybrid system combining planning with flexibility. In practice, however, the reforms created instability. The old command structures were weakened, but effective market mechanisms were not fully established. This led to supply disruptions, inflationary pressures, and widespread shortages. Instead of revitalizing the economy, perestroika exposed its structural weaknesses. The failure was not merely technical, it was systemic. The Soviet economy had been designed for central control. Partial decentralization without institutional support led to dysfunction rather than renewal. Even more transformative was Gorbachev's policy of Glasnost, or openness. Initially intended to increase transparency and combat corruption, Glasnost evolved into a broad liberalization of Soviet society. Censorship was relaxed, political prisoners were released, and public discourse expanded dramatically. For the first time in decades, Soviet citizens could openly discuss issues such as Stalin's purges, government inefficiency, and the failures of the Communist Party. This had profound consequences. Glasnost did not merely reform the system, it delegitimized it. By exposing historical injustices and current failures, it eroded the ideological foundations of Soviet authority. Moreover, Glasnost unleashed nationalist movements across the Soviet republics. Long-suppressed ethnic and regional identities re-emerged with force, challenging the unity of the state. In foreign policy, Gorbachev pursued what he called new thinking. Rejecting the zero-sum logic of the Cold War, he sought cooperation rather than confrontation with the West. His relationship with Ronald Reagan marked a decisive shift. Through a series of high-profile summits, the two leaders negotiated significant arms reduction agreements, most notably the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. These agreements reduced nuclear arsenals and lowered the risk of global conflict. Equally significant was Gorbachev's decision to abandon the Brezhnev Doctrine. By refusing to use military force to maintain communist regimes in Eastern Europe, he effectively allowed those states to determine their own futures. The result was a wave of revolutions in 1989. Communist governments collapsed across Eastern Europe, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall. This moment symbolized not only the end of division in Germany, but the broader collapse of Soviet influence in Europe. By the early 1990s, the cumulative effects of economic instability, political liberalization, and rising nationalism had pushed the Soviet Union to the brink. Republics such as Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia declared independence. Other regions followed, undermining the integrity of the Union. Internally, Gorbachev faced opposition from both reformers and conservatives. Reformers, including Boris Yeltsin, pushed for more radical change and greater sovereignty for Russia. Hardliners within the Communist Party, meanwhile, sought to reverse reforms and restore central control. In August 1991, a group of hardline officials launched a coup attempt against Gorbachev. Although the coup ultimately failed, it fatally weakened his authority. Power shifted decisively to Yeltsin and the leaders of the Russian Republic. By December 1991, the Soviet Union formally dissolved. Gorbachev resigned, bringing an end not only to his presidency but to the existence of the Soviet state itself. Gorbachev's legacy remains one of the most contested in modern history. Internationally, he is widely celebrated as a statesman who helped end the Cold War peacefully. His efforts earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's often credited with reducing the risk of nuclear conflict. Domestically, however, his reputation is far more ambivalent. Many in Russia associate his leadership with economic collapse, political instability, and the loss of superpower status. For them, Gorbachev is less a hero than a figure of national decline. This divergence highlights a fundamental tension in evaluating historical leadership. Gorbachev's intentions to reform and preserve socialism were clear, yet his policies produced outcomes that he neither anticipated nor desired. Mikhail Gorbachev's career encapsulates a central paradox of political history, that reform can be more destabilizing than repression. By attempting to modernize the Soviet system, he exposed its fragility. By liberalizing political life, he unleashed forces that could not be contained. Unlike many leaders of declining empires, Gorbachev did not resort to large-scale violence to preserve power. In this sense, his legacy is not only one of collapse but of restraint. The end of the Soviet Union, though chaotic, was far less violent than it might have been. Ultimately, Gorbachev stands as a transformative figure, one who reshaped global politics ended a decades-long ideological conflict, and presided over the peaceful dissolution of one of history's most powerful states. His story is not simply one of failure or success, but of profound historical change, driven by the unpredictable consequences of reform. Thanks for watching. For more bite-sized bits of blistering history, please like and subscribe.